You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 463 of the podcast. And in this one, I chat with Jonny Say. Jonny is a UK-based therapist and co-director at the Integrative Centre for OCD Therapy. And in this episode, we discuss an update on Jonny, what is insight in OCD, how it affects OCD, the 4 things Jonny sees in clients with low insight, including when mental compulsions go up, insight goes down, the intensity of the symptoms, low insight and shame go hand in hand, and the beliefs that we carry about thoughts and feelings. We also discuss his words of hope around this and much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So thank you to Jonny for his time on this topic. I think it's an important topic to cover, so I'm glad we could do it. It's always a pleasure to chat with Jonny. And of course, thank you to you guys for listening as always. I hope this episode helps you in some way. And without further ado, here is Jonny. Welcome to the podcast, Jonny.
Thanks, Stu. Great to see you. All of 10 minutes since we were last talking.
Yes, good to see you again. So, obviously I know, or maybe I don't, but you know, for everyone listening, what's new with you? Anything you want to share since you've last been on?
I think you do know most of it. I mean, obviously our focus is a lot on the Integrative Centre. We've now got more therapists within our team. We've got a really lovely team of people that I'm super inspired to work with, and all highly knowledgeable, all very experienced in OCD work already, a mixture of clinical psychologists and psychotherapists. And it's just been wonderful building up that team, as you know well, and us connecting. We've done socials, we've had fun sociable times as well, going out and things, which has felt like, you know, in this remote working world, it's nice to have that sense of a team and connection. And then obviously, as you know well, you and I are thinking about ways of developing and growing what we're doing and helping more people and increasing knowledge on, you know, different options for treatment and trainings. And so it's sort of full attention there. I still do some of my own work on trauma and other disorders and you know, other presentations. So I'm seeing some clients that aren't OCD based, and got various projects on the go alongside all of this. And then 2 young kids that are keeping me very, very busy and very focused. So it's that sort of phase of life, really, just work, you know, trying to make a meaningful impact and
surviving.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, nice. As you said, we've launched the training aspect of the centre now, where we're starting to put trainings on for therapists. There's one on now, and we'll release more in 2024, and we'll definitely be covering more of those integrative type approaches, or alternative approaches that can be integrated into ERP, as well as covering things like ACT in more detail for OCD. So any therapists listening. And then maybe a question for you, Jonny, is because you said there, you know, you have a certain percentage of your caseload is non-OCD, covering varying aspects, and I'm the same, and probably the same as you. I do that, 1, to keep it interesting, 2, because I learn a lot from those people, that you can also then bring into your OCD work, because no one just has OCD, you know. I remember Pete Weiss, or Dr. Pete Weiss, saying that to me actually in one of the early episodes of the podcast, like episode 12 or whenever he came on. I think it was then. And he said, like, oh, if someone or something like, okay, something like it's rare that someone just has OCD. And it depends how you define it. If you're just talking comorbidities, then yeah, you might find someone that just has OCD. But when you look at there's wider maybe family stuff in the system around them, just general issues with life that that needs to be worked through sometimes in therapy too. It's not just the DSM. So I guess my long-winded question is, I've recently been finding the work I've been doing with non-OCD people really helpful to the work I do with OCD people with the other stuff that's affecting them and that may be fueling some of the OCD. I don't know if any thoughts you have on that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think on one hand, OCD is a very specific pattern of symptoms. On another hand, it overlaps massively with all kinds of different disorders because everything is difficult thoughts, difficult emotions, body sensations, urges, impulses, sometimes memories and past, sometimes more in the present. Like it's always clusters of these symptoms, so you can learn a lot from other disorders that is applicable. What has helped someone deal with a different type of disturbing thought, and what can I learn about that for intrusive thoughts, or and I mean, it's hard to have OCD for a long time and not get depressed. I mean, it's almost impossible. I think you can have people who have more high functioning depression, and they have a disposition or some natural traits that sort of protect them a bit against the depression. But really, if you look at, how they're doing in their life, there's often is depression there. And then you obviously have the more severe end of it. So yeah, I learn a lot from that. I like working with trauma, and there's obviously often overlap, as your recent episode on trauma spoke to. I think, learning from other anxiety disorders, and, working with people with more panic disorder or generalized anxiety disorder or something else. And I think, yeah, you're learning stuff that overlaps skill wise, but you're also learning the humanity there, and the relationship that you're building, and sometimes you're challenged by people and you learn from that, and then other people are, you're more trying to challenge them to be honest about what's going on, and they're holding back a lot. Other people are telling you exactly why you're a terrible therapist and everything you're doing wrong, and it's really interesting, and it tests you and challenges you to have that range of presentation. So yeah, I agree. I think, and I think, I'm obviously very much drawing upon ACT, and ACT is a transdiagnostic therapy. And yeah, sometimes there's the argument you have to be very specific, and how could you learn everything about different disorders? At the same time, if you're thinking about processes and skills that are transdiagnostic and work across different processes and disorders, then I think you can actually use the same skill set across a wide range of difficulties. You may not be the absolute expert in all of them, but you can know things that are helpful across those disorders. And it keeps it interesting. As you said, it's very interesting for the therapist, I think, to have that.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you for that. So let's talk about today's topic, which is insight, or lack of, or low, or whatever wording we want to give to that. Firstly, what is insight?
Yeah. Well, I think in this context with OCD, it's really how much do we believe what OCD is saying? And high insight is there's still doubt, and we don't fully know, we don't fully disbelieve it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a disorder that's tripping us up. But there's more insight that it doesn't fit with who we are, and it feels less statistically likely to happen. And there's that sense that I'm very frightened and I can get a lot of doubt and distressed by it, but there's a big chunk of me that sort of is in the camp of this is OCD, versus lower levels of insight where actually we might be thinking this isn't OCD, and we're either trying to sort of get clarity on that, and sometimes people are really trying to prove that it's not OCD because they want certainty so they can then take action and, prevent the threat and avoid the danger. Or you get, the highest levels, or the lowest levels of insight where people really might not even be going into therapy because they're acting in accordance with, or not accordance, they're acting as if it's true, and then they're going into massive avoidance, and everything in life's built around the OCD, and they might not be going into therapy because of that. And they're not they're basically living with the assumption that it's true, and then trying to do everything they can to prevent the worst case happening, and tragically even including people taking their own life or trying to do that to prevent what they're frightened of. And I wanted to just while I say that, I wanted to say a nice caveat up front that this could be a classic topic where if you're deep in your OCD, you might hear this and go, oh gosh, if I have low insight, I can't recover. Or, we're hearing all these awful things about this. Or what if I develop low insight? Or, if we're someone that has maybe the mental health recovery fears or depression fears or suicidal OCD, and we could be triggered by this. So we've got to be really ready to, to use our skills as you're listening. If you're one of those people, watch your mind doing that, listen to what we're actually saying. We're going to lay out why it's difficult, but then also what we can do to work with it. So I just wanted to say that up front, because it's a classic thing.
Yeah.
Here, I've got some statistics and things, and it makes it sound like it's much harder, and it is, but it's not impossible. And I think to define it, I do like the DSM definition of this, where they build it into the definition. Obviously, we're ICD-10 in Europe, so I shouldn't even talk about the DSM, but I do like the way they sort of clarify, or they classify. You've got good or fair insight, which is the individual recognizes that OCD beliefs are definitely or probably not true, or that they may or may not be true. So there's a big sense of they're not true, and still some doubt. And then there's poor insight. So the individual thinks OCD beliefs are probably true. And then there's absent insight or delusional beliefs. So the individual is completely convinced the OCD beliefs are true. So there are like these three levels of insight. And delusional can trip people up because they hear that. And if they have mental health OCD, they're like, oh, that means I'm delusional. No, it's a different use of the word. It's like on the OCD fears and beliefs. It's not a general sort of trait of delusion. I think it's a helpful word, but it can trip people up because people associate it with that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, the really good explanation, and I think it's the ICD-11 now in Europe.
Sorry, yeah, thank you.
Not to be pedantic,
but I used to say that.
Yeah. Well, look, it was a good disclaimer you put on the whole delusional wording. I agree. It's an important word, but it can be misleading in the context in which you've used it. But I think, whenever I talk about my experience of what I think in retrospect was BDD, I never got a diagnosis at the time.
Yeah.
I had zero insight. This was real. This wasn't even a possibility that I was wrong. I was wrong, but at the time it felt 100% real. I didn't have any of that doubt, and the only word I could use to describe that was delusional. And it's not in a psychosis delusional in the way they use it in that disorder. But that is the only word in the English dictionary that I know that sums up what was going on in my head, because almost my vision even changed to what I was seeing in the mirror. It was, it was, so I think I understand why they use that word in the DSM. But then, on what maybe high insight or good insight, whatever word we want to use, looks like. I think a common thing in OCD I hear people say amongst my clients, amongst myself, amongst people on this podcast, is they will say, I know it's ridiculous, I'm worried about this, I know it's silly, or I'm embarrassed to say it, I just can't help but do it. I think that's a very common way of people with high insight with OCD sharing their experience. One part of their brain knows it's silly. Of course, I'm not going to wake up in the night and hurt someone, or of course, there's not some weird virus on that door handle. I know it's ridiculous, but what if I can't help but do the compulsion anyway because I can't take the risk? And that really sums up OCD. But what we're talking about is maybe the smaller population of people that it's like, no, there is germs on that door handle, or no, there's a 99% chance I could wake up in the night. Is that stronger belief or ideation is maybe what we're talking about today.
Exactly. And you're right. The statistics say 15 to 36% of patients have had poor insight. So it's not an insight. I mean, that varies across studies. This is a sort of summary article. So, it can be a smaller group. It can be 36%. It's not insignificant, right? And it's associated with worse outcomes, more severity of OCD symptoms, higher comorbidity, lower quality of life, and more chronic sort of symptoms. So, but you're right, it's a smaller subgroup. But actually, I get a funny view of this because actually almost all the clients reaching out to me are in this category. So I sort of see lots of clients like this. So it feels to me like lots of people have it. And then, I work with someone who has that higher insight. It's like, oh yeah, I remember. And sometimes it can be like a thing over time. People start with higher insight, and we'll talk about some of the things I think that cause this. But one of them is just being in this for so long and being in the compulsion so long that your insight sort of disappears over time. And so yeah, you're right, it's not everyone, and often, and probably for your client group, sometimes if you're catching this early with kids, you might be getting them before the insight has been lost as well. I think examples for me, I was thinking of subtypes and sorts of ways I've seen it. Obviously, this isn't any specific clients. It's like amalgamations of different clients and things. But, I was thinking with something like POCD, pedophile OCD, a client might be having really graphic images at high frequency. Their intrusive thoughts might have changed from like, what if I am this thing to you are this thing, you're going to do it. It can be more the command or judgment, intrusive thoughts. They're getting more impulses. So you feel like the body's moving. They're really monitoring, tracking any body movement around triggers. And they're getting really tangled up with, oh God, I think I'm about to do something, and there might be mini false memories sort of weaving in there, and then they're basically into full avoidance of all children, all triggers, all everything. Life's on hold, large periods of time, convinced. I mean, I have clients like this that are trying to convince me in therapy that it is real. It's not like you said, I know this is silly, but, or I know I don't need to worry about this, but they're actually going, this must be, I'm having this, it must be true. And, they'll be saying things like if I figure out it's true, I'm going to kill myself, or, it can be as extreme as that. And, that's one example. Harm, it might be similar with harm, that people are having very, distressing, feelings. They're having this sort of foreboding, intense feeling. They're having impulses again, maybe commands, single words, difficult images and they really feel they're about to snap at any point. So they're avoiding everyone and really sitting on their hands at times to sort of stop themselves doing things, and avoiding all threats. They might be experts on psychopathy and psychosis and other disorders that they associate with these things, and they're watching out for when they're about to lose it, and thinking, they might even think they're having hallucinations and other things. They're so frightened, misbelieving diagnoses from professionals. I think real event often comes into this. You know, people get so trapped on what they believe happened and how it happened, and they lose all insight by, you know, the compulsions of going over and over the memory, and you know, seeing it from a very judgmental, biased perspective, and not how they would see it for a friend or someone else. And they you know, people will often say, well, you know, everyone else's OCD sounds kind of vanilla compared with mine. Like mine must be real because I don't, you know, associate with this kind of what if I've got, what if I'm this thing and I'm going to do this thing? I feel anxious. They're like, I don't, my presentation's not like that.
Mm.
You know, I think one thing on that, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts on it is, I think sometimes, like in the OCD textbooks, you've got the early versions that were, you know, before all the different subtypes were understood and the different ways it would show up were understood. And they're quite, you know, they maybe major on subtypes like contamination and checking and things like that. And you know, they might be presenting very much an anxious presentation of OCD. And what if, you know, every intrusive thought's a what if. You hear people saying that, you
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
it's not what I see. It's not always what if. And, you know, so people read that, or they hear some expert talking about it, or they hear a podcast and they go, that doesn't sound like my experience. Like, I'm not anxious anymore. I'm just feeling depressed or shame or
Mm.
something else. Or, you know, my mind isn't saying what if, it's saying you are, or you want to do this thing. Or so I think that, you know, that's changing. And lots of people are talking about this, and books are being published that give this nuance. And people aren't just recycling the same examples of more simplistic versions of OCD. And also, people, you know, modern culture, we're all so introspective and educated through online consumption. You know, OCD can get more complex because we've just read so much and understand so much. And so I think people are making that clearer now. But if you come to it and you are having this more intense presentation, then you read a very simplistic what if anxious version of OCD, you go, that doesn't sound like me. This must be real, you know, and
Mm.
you they lose insight that way. And I think real event is like that a lot.
Yeah, I think there's too much. When I say too much, it's great that there's so much information in society and so readily at our fingertips. But I think quite often with OCD, it's not always a good thing. One, because you can go do the compulsive checking online and get 50 different versions, and one of those versions are going to agree with what you're worrying about. You know, how many times have we gone on WebMD or something similar and we've been diagnosed with some horrible illness instantly just by putting we've got headaches and something else in? You know, we're always like one click away from being diagnosed with something horrible. Or maybe it's changed, but when I used to do it, probably because I was compulsively checking. There was something in my head around, you know, that was it. So with, like you're saying, the common experience of OCD is like the what ifs, but then there's these people that's not the case for me. So with low insight, these people are experiencing much more fusion. If we think in ACT terms, they're much more fused or blinded by their thoughts or connected with their thoughts. Versus someone with the what if, there's that element of, I can see this as separate to me. It's something a bit wacky. It's not necessarily who I am, but I keep getting pulled into it. So there's distance pulling in, but maybe with low insight, there's not that push and pull. It's just here constantly on their face. They see the world through this lens, which is, you know, whatever the worry is. So is now the good time to sort of talk about how do you work with that when someone is so fused and believing in that thought? Like, how do you get that diffusion? Because I definitely find that hard with my clients who are really fused. I find ACT incredibly hard to use those skills to try and get diffusion there at times.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to give that time and focus. I mean, maybe it leads me in. Maybe I can do the four things that I see are big factors for this, and that would fit with the first one, and we could take it that way. And what the issue is and how to deal with it. I mean, I think you're right. Low insight really is fusion. Fusion is, I'm so invested and connected to a thought that it's driving my behavior. So here we're fused with this is true, and then we're doing complete avoidance, or 100 like compulsions all day long, or whatever it might be. So you're right. I think it relates to I've got these four things that I see in clients with low insight. And the first one is, it's like the more the mental compulsions go up, the more the insight goes down. It's like they're in almost relationship. Like the more I'm ruminating, the more I'm analyzing, the more I'm going over this stuff, the more I get confused about who I am, my experience of the world, my common sense, what I want to do with my life, my goals, my values. Like that just gets so confusing to people, and they trip themselves up. And a mental compulsion that at one point gave them reassurance stops working, and then they start to go, okay, well, if I can't prove it's not true, maybe I need to prove it's true, so that then I can start avoiding and backing away. And so it's all this mental compulsion gets really tangled, and that's one way you can get this high fusion. And I guess the way to work with it, in my book, you've got to sort of get someone on board with understanding that that's the issue. Or at least, there's a chance that's the issue. They may not be able to go, yeah, I see what you're saying, and that makes sense. They might go, they're still in the camp of like, but I think this is true. But you want to sort of open them up with sort of mapping out that process and that chain and what's going on there, and what will happen. I mean, I will always lead with the workability as well. If we hold that belief like that, how is it going to play out over the long run? And is it true that it really does keep people safe, or it really does, avoid stuff? Like, I was with someone once that was really in this high fusion and high lack of insight, and they thought all the compulsions they were doing were protecting the triggers that they were afraid of harming, and they stepped into a road, and almost hit by, vehicles and cars. You can be so you have to get the workability of this, of like, is it true that being so invested and so believing in this really is helping? And it's always harming someone, and normally the client most of all. And they might say, well, okay, I can handle that if it means I'm not going to do these awful things. Okay, we'll have to look at that in more detail. Well, it will be harming other people, because you're not available for people. You're not able to support and help and, be of service in the world if you're living your OCD. So it is harming people. So there'll be that kind of workability, the psychoeducation of the process that's going on, trying to get the rationale for practice, and then a lot of practice. The big mistake I see with ACT a lot, when people are choosing to integrate it into ERP, is that people will just talk about ACT a bit. They'll say a few metaphors, talk about the ideas. They might do one body scan in one session once, and then that's the kind of ACT bit ticked off. And then we're just doing ERP, and we're expecting somehow those things are going to come together. Where you and I know you got to be drilling it, practicing it every session, lots of practice. You got to really learn to diffuse. And actually, if you're good at diffusion, the insight will come back. You'll reduce the low insight if you truly can watch your mind and really step back and not react and not compulse. The insight will come back. So that only comes through lots of practice. Obviously, there can be barriers to that, but that's what we're trying to do. So some clients, I just make sure first 5-10 minutes we're doing practice every session. We got it in, we've done it. Are they practicing at home? If they're not, how can we adapt that? How can we work on that? Practice, 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 practice. You can't just stop ruminating if you're in this low insight. So you've got to learn a skill to help you do that. What about you? What would you say you've done with those sorts of high fusion, maybe doing all this compulsion sort of thing?
It's tough, right? Isn't it? I mean, there's an element of insight, right? Usually they wouldn't be there.
It wouldn't be in therapy if there was
Yeah,
literally no insight. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
There's something keeping them there, but the
yeah,
majority is I believe this, or it feels very real, and I'm going to follow it.
yeah,
Um, so I'm sure you're going to come to this, but workability,
yeah.
um, that can. Are you going to talk about that in a bit?
Well, I kind of touched on it a little bit, but yeah,
Okay.
I mean, you add to that definitely.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
you can do the exercise of like coming up with two columns. What's the OCD doing for you?
yeah,
Um, what's it costing you in life? Uh, and usually the what's it costing is way longer than
yeah,
what's it doing for you, and you can start to use that as having discussions around the
yeah,
OCD,
yeah,
and then I think then it's buying into, okay, so you feel this is real. I feel this is OCD. You're here seeing a therapist that works with OCD. So
yeah.
can we lean on that for a little while, and for 2 months, 3 months, just commit to the skills, to the work, and then we judge whether it's going to
Yeah.
help you or not. And this goes to the same actually with clients who think they're treatment resistant.
Yeah.
It's like, no, let's give it 3 months, stick to this plan and see what happens. And then we criticize it or judge it.
Yeah, and let's be able to really hand on heart at the end of those 3 months say
Yeah.
we really went for it. We put
Yeah.
in the hours of practice. We tried to respond throughout the day using skills to do response prevention. And we did that over and over and over again. And let's, if someone can't hand on heart say that, then we've got to commit more and do more and sort of practice more. Yeah, completely. And we've got, we've talked about other tools for diffusion, dipping in and out the stream as a more recent act intervention from Russ Harris, which I think is really brilliant for this sort of stuff. And yeah, building that up. The next one for me that often causes this low insight is the sheer intensity of the symptoms. It happens when people have massive panic through the roof, huge waves of shame, high depression, the emotional feeling is really intense. So we believe it. So we think it must be true. Or the intensity of the thoughts, the frequency, or the way they're showing up, the graphicness of them, the way they're trying to prove the OCD is right, or the command or judgment, or the way they show up in these complex ways that don't seem like just what if. They're more frightening, really, and sometimes they're a bit dissociated. It's almost hard to put it into words. It's like vague, weird, fragmented sort of thinking that feels very intense with a lot of feeling. Um, and I think that sort of intensity of those symptoms, the urges to do compulsions, I think when that's really high, people lose insight as well. And I think there's often an assumption in CBT and a lot of therapy that everyone's the same and everyone has the same emotions. And this is why I really value DBT, because I think Marsha Linehan, working with the subgroup of people who are very suicidal, has really seen that actually everyone doesn't have the same emotional system. Some people do have like a higher signal, a louder nervous system. In DBT, they say you're like an emotional burns victim, so you just feel everything so much more intensely. And I think that's true, and I think that gets underappreciated in sometimes in traditional CBT, and that's a lot of the clients coming to me. They've been told, "Well, a panic attack's a panic attack. Just sit through it. It'll be gone in 20 minutes." No, not all panic attacks are the same. If I really think I'm about to die, which I had many panic attacks like that, and you've lost all insight, you feel like you're about to die, that isn't the same as high physiological arousal and panic that you kind of know is a panic attack and will pass, and you think, well, I'm pretty solid, I can get through this. They're not the same thing. And the same with shame. Shame can be so much more intense for some people than others. There can be trauma in this often, if people have this, or they might just be biologically vulnerable to this sort of stronger emotion. I think that doesn't get acknowledged enough, and that's a big part with the low insight.
Hmm.
They might be dissociated, they might be, having other things there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. I think your point speaks to maybe with ERP. How do I word this? Or certain, not so much ERP, but certain therapists using ERP in a very, well, this is evidence based. This works. If it's not working, what's going wrong? What are you not doing? Like, and it versus they need something much more tailored. I'm not
Yeah,
saying ERP is not part of that. Absolutely, it is.
it's got
But
to be part
way
of it.
more
But
adjustments, way more
mm,
scaffolding to make
yeah,
the same medicine work. You know. Um,
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think people are getting onto this with neurodivergence and adapting this for autism, things like that. And I think for trauma, people are onto this. So obviously this has been developed, but it can be missed sometimes for with certain clinicians. So I think the antidote in my mind for this is you have to build that really strong skill set to if you're one of these people, and I count myself in this, having panic attacks from age 6 and being depersonalized half the time, and I was had intense symptoms, and I looked around me and I had friends who had a bit of anxiety, and I was like, this does feel different, what's going on. And I think if you're one of those people, then we need bigger acceptance muscles. We need to deepen this ability to observe these uncomfortable, very distressing feelings and thoughts, and stand back from it and feel stable and grounded and able to do that and able to focus on things we value. And sometimes you need some preliminary techniques, like you adapt drop and anchor to be much briefer acknowledging, and then more movement, more active engagement. So it's a bit like the DBT distraction, but we're layering in acceptance a lot more, and we're not doing it as distraction, but we are choosing some of those same, values-based actions. Like, it might be too hard for me to sit with this, so let's go and do some cognitive demanding task, or let's do something that physical exercise or something else. And I think sometimes you need to layer up and build your confidence in being able to do all of that before you then start to sit with things more, or start to do exposure more directly on. And that, like, even if it all blows up and it re-triggers your trauma or depressed mood or shame, you know how to ride through those moments using these other, acceptance and
yeah.
engagement skills.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And with, like, if we think about the term emotional burn victim, I'm laughing because it's a great descriptor, but equally horrific
Yeah.
in equal
Yes.
proportion.
Yes.
If we take people that identify with that, then I would imagine also there's a lot of compassion that needs to be done through the work to, if they are that sensitive to the emotional touch, then they need a gentle touch, so to speak.
Yeah, completely. Because really, they've developed that either because there's a neurobiology vulnerability to it, but that could be epigenetics. So there could be a trauma history going back generations that influences that. Or there's a kind of just unlucky set of genes that are higher on neuroticism and emotional, dysregulation, things like that. But more often than not, it's coming together with an invalidating environment or traumatic environment in some shape or form. It could be the early attachment, but it could be school bullying, siblings, other people, abusive relationship. There'll be something there that has, also, or not always, but often there's something there. So compassion, is so essential, because it's going to be linked to shame. I don't think many people with this high emotional system don't carry shame as well, and don't sort of carry that alongside it. So yeah, I mean, I think you're so right. And it kind of leads me on to the next one, actually, that low, and they're all related, but low insight and shame, I think, go so hand in hand. If I view myself with self-loathing, self-attack, I'm really thinking I'm not worthy, and, really deep in shame, then all these intrusive thoughts are going to stick to me more. They fit with how I see my sense of self. They're going to permeate, and it's harder to diffuse them because they really latch on. Because I do believe I'm a terrible person. So if I'm having thoughts like a terrible person, I'm more likely to fuse with them. Whereas if I have a compassionate, accepting, strong sense of self, which is like, I am worthy and good enough. I'm not perfect. I'm a flawed human, but I'm lovable and worthy and deserving. Then it's much easier to diffuse these thoughts and to go, oh, just noise. It's like a headache. It's like a migraine. It's like a buzzing fly, whatever. I can let that come and go. So I think, the shame can be the thing causing the low insight often as well.
Yeah, because we think of OCD being ego dystonic against what the ego wishes. Then yeah, if you've got low insight and you deem yourself a good person and you're worried about harming others and you've got that low insight, of course you're going to do the compulsions, because you can't take the risk of being a bad person, because that's completely against who you are and your identity, which then fuels the low insight.
And that's really the guilt part as well, what you're
Yeah.
describing. That's the real intolerance of guilt, that sense that, I could do something bad and I could regret it, and I could be doing behavior that, whereas the shame is like, I'm not good enough, and that's known by others. Others believe that. I heard an interesting talk on sort of the evolution of emotions recently, and the expert was saying, shame is really also that sense that in other people's minds, I'm, unworthy and not enough. So, yeah, I think shame and guilt are can be such barriers there, and such low insight. The last one, and the four that I think are really important, is the beliefs that we carry, the sort of beliefs about thoughts, about feelings, about behavior, about OCD, about, if we're carrying a load of beliefs like thoughts are really important and always meaningful, and if they come a lot, it means they're more important, and if they come with a lot of emotion, it means they're more important, and my emotional system is always accurate, and it's giving me wisdom, and it's giving me an insight into what I really feel. That's going to trip us up. That's going to push us into low insight. Whereas if we see our thoughts and feelings really as something evolution has, evolved to try and protect us and keep us safe, and they're better safe than sorry. It's like the smoke alarm. You don't want it to be 100% accurate. You want it to overfire, because if it's 100% accurate, what if on that day it doesn't quite catch you? You want it to be, you're setting off every time you put bacon under the grill, because that's going to be safer. And our emotions and systems are like that. So you have all this popular psychology and wisdom saying, trust your feelings, and that they're always meaningful. And yeah, okay, there is information there. It's not that they're never useful, but when we're deep in OCD, we're all in the misfiring. Our system is better safe than sorry, overreacting, trying to spot every threat around, and then every threat internal, and then trying to move 4 steps away from that threat. And that is not a feeling to trust. That is misfiring. Again, this evolutionary expert was sort of saying that, you've got the two polar ends. You've got the hyper rational logic, feelings don't mean anything, and then you've got the new age emotions and feelings tell us everything about our inner desires and who we are. And actually, it's right bang in the middle. Sometimes emotions are helpful, not when they come with a load of doubt and distress and OCD, but when they come with a very strong sense of like, yeah, this feels right and it aligns with my values and it's meaningful. And we need our logical mind, but we also need some feeling to have the wise mind, the combination of the two. So yeah, I think there's these unworkable beliefs around thoughts and feelings that drive low insight as well. And the same about OCD. If we believe OCD is always this, doubt and disorder, and also even worse, if we always believe it's about contamination, checking, and perfectionism, then, we're going to be, by that belief, we're going to be driven into low insight about taboo themes and other themes and other things that show up.
Yeah, exactly. That middle path, middle way. as the Buddha would say. And, you know, with all the skills you mentioned earlier, dipping in and out of the stream, dropping anchor, urge surfing, all of that, you know, there's several videos on our center's channel, and you've got loads on your YouTube channel. So I'll put the links to both those YouTube channels in the show notes. So people can practice those, not watch them, practice them.
Yeah. I've got an OCD skills playlist that really simplifies the sort of sequence of the OCD skills.
Cool.
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to say that I really wanted to get in terms of how you work with this, and this is from my own experience of, like, I had times where, I had times with health anxiety where I was convinced I had whatever the illness was, and I was not believing professionals. I've had it with more puro stuff where I really thought I was this awful person wanting to do these awful things, and so I went into complete avoidance. I've had it with existential OCD where I was convinced, the worst case philosophy was true and everything was meaningless. And I've been in it with various and I've been in it with depression. You can have low insight in depression where you really think it's going to go on forever. It'll never change. There's nothing you can do about it. And what really helped me, and this is the thing I'm sort of on a lot with a lot of my clients just now, is it's how do we ride through the really intense storms of OCD? How do we get under our belt some intense episodes where we've really been triggered and we're really in it, but we hold the line with our skills. We keep diffusing, we keep engaging in life. We keep, we have a behavior plan that we stick to, of values-based stuff, and we move through it. And we have this experience of being intensely triggered, even to the point where we feel low on insight, and yet we call its bluff almost, and we keep going. And I think you clock up enough of those experiences. I mean, I've been saying to clients, get 10 of those under your belt, and then let's see how you feel about this. And if you really get 10 of those, you're like in panic, you feel you're about to die, and you really observe it, and you really stay present, you stay to values, you ride it through, or you're really in the harm or POCD or something else, and you stay around the triggers, and you stay focused on values, and you observe the thoughts without reaction, accept the feelings and sensations and impulses, anything else without reaction. You stick on values, you really extend that out, and you get through them. I think that's how you regain insight massively. And it's hard. It's very hard to do. It's terrifying. And I spent decades trying to avoid sort of doing that. But that, to me, is how people regain their insight, really, is being gently relentless and continuing through those intense episodes. Getting a few under your belt gets easier. They're not all as difficult as that. And then you start to get your insight back. And you can mentally rehearse for that. You can prepare for that and do I've got mental rehearsal practices on the channel where you imagine you're going to be in that state and how you use your skills. You can set up goals for that. You can be doing lots of daily practice so you're ready for that. Lots of ERP so you're ready for that. But they're the moments, I think, that really, teach us the most on this topic.
I agree with that. Yeah, I don't do the whole get 10 of those. I think that's a good idea. I do it in a more general way of, we just need that moment where you see your brain, you see it, what it's doing, and that's like an epiphany. Like, it just all makes sense at that point. And that's the start of, getting that diffusion.
Exactly.
That's my hope for the clients, is they can get those epiphany moments.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes we need a lot of help with this. So
yes.
you must be in therapy. I mean, I guess the very low insight, delusional insight, sometimes they're only finding their way into therapy because life is going so bad because of following the OCD, that family members put them forward, or intervention teams come in, or, there's a tiny flicker of insight. So they'll consider it, or but probably the more extreme end of the scale you're seeing in inpatient, and you really need that kind of help probably for that. Although everyone can hit their moment, and everyone can have their moment where they think, no more, I'm going to go for it, and that doesn't have to be inpatient. But I think, sometimes you need the support. You certainly need a therapist. You sometimes need, recovery support groups, OCD Action over here in the UK, joining groups with people like that, our good friend Chrissy Hodges, peer support stuff and groups, and having something like that, to help you, and maybe listening to a lot of inspiration of people who've gotten through it, and good recovery stories, like a lot of the really good ones on your podcast too, and going back to the ones that resonate. And okay, you could say, is that compulsive? It can be, but sometimes in crisis you need that. And that's it. Like, I think of it's like a methadone. It's like, you won't do that forever, but let's listen to all those inspiring stories for now and really try and get hyped up on recovery. And then when we're doing better, we can pull that away and start listening to podcasts about funny things or interesting things or whatever we're into. So I think sometimes you need that social support. Like, I guess because I'm so I often bias towards the individual and your own skills and capacity, but we mustn't forget sometimes you need, that crew of people with you, willing you on and trying to help you, fight against the low inside.
Yeah, and if you're in your head all day ruminating and believing what your brain is telling you, then trying to feel more touch points throughout the day, support groups, podcasts, books, I'm running out of things, websites, other so YouTube videos around OCD, you're going to give your brain more opportunities to jog that this could be OCD, which might help balance. Yeah, it might be compulsive, but watching OCD stuff is going to be a better compulsion than ruminating about the thing you're deeply fused with, and at least that's my take on it.
Exactly. It's like a methadone. It's like we're withdrawing from the heroin of the
judicious use.
Judicious use. Judicious use. And it also can be, I mean, I certainly, when I was in my worst phases, I was getting a lot of inspiration from people I was listening to, a lot within ACT, actually, Stephen Hayes' own experience, and right back to good old Claire Weeks and all the people who've come out of her acceptance tradition, and lots of, and then all the good OCD recovery stories. And I was listening to that, getting hyped up on that to have another go, at recovery, give it another shot. And sometimes you really need that.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, okay, so let's think. So you can pick up the phone and call the 40-year-old you, which was only, what, a year ago?
No, how old am I? I'm 40, I'm 42. So yeah, it was a couple of years ago now. So
damn. Okay. So you can pick up the phone and call the 40-year-old you. So fairly recently, but what could he have benefited from hearing from you?
The first thing that comes to mind is having some genuine appreciation and recognizing all the good work that he's been doing, and how hard he's been working on stuff, and what he's trying to achieve. So something about acknowledging that, and then something about social connection as well, because I think my personality, I guess OCD pushed me a lot into isolation. I really went internal with a lot of and I didn't tell anyone anything about a lot of what I was going through the whole time. And that trait is in me. Like, I can become perhaps overly self-sufficient to the point where, I can very much be with my own company a lot of the time and really enjoy it. And I think in some ways that's a good thing, but I might remind him, keep those connections going, make time for old friends, make time for new friends, do reach out and connect a little bit more than you are doing. I think I would tell him as well.
Yeah. It's easy to forget when life gets busy, right? Social connection.
Yeah, definitely.
So, you got a billboard in Cambridge. What do you want written on that billboard? Go to Oxford. Joking.
I
Anyone
put
that
the
went to Cambridge.
Integrative Centre for OCD
Yeah.
Therapy up there, bold.
Yeah.
I think I think when we've talked about this before, I've had the sort of compassion messages, the self-acceptance messages. I mean, they're still such an important principle for me, and I think everyone needs more of that. There's not enough of that. But for some reason today, I'm thinking the appreciation side of things. The more, I think we all can, when we're not struggling with our mental health, it's so easy to just not be really taking in the good and savoring and appreciating life. And then when we're in the really tough phases, it feels impossible to do it, but actually it's still a resource and you can still orientate towards these things and you can even have gratitude. And that can be very confronting and challenging when we're really struggling because we don't want to be grateful, but we're not doing it for anyone else. It's for us. And so I'd probably put, something about look around you and appreciate this world.
Yeah, I like that. Nice one. So, is there anything else you wish you could have said or shared?
As always, I have a lot of ideas on this, but I'll try and focus on brevity rather than layering in more and more. And I can always write about those extra ideas. So no, I think we got the main stuff. I think, back to that point, if you feel you're in low insight or lower insight, it does not mean it is hopeless. It just means we've got to work hard. We've got to really work hard on recovery and be relentless. Do not give in to this disorder. Keep going. Keep searching for more help, more support. And it doesn't mean anything. And actually, sometimes low insight could be helpful because you're going to be hitting the rock bottom. And I think sometimes rock bottom is the thing that then you grow from and you can really get good recovery from. So you could argue sometimes low insight is going to be better for recovery because you're going to be hitting up against, the costs of OCD far more than other things.
Yeah, I like that. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, as always, for sharing your expertise and insight. I appreciate it.
Great to talk to you, Stu, and to hear your wisdom, your thoughts on this as well. I'm learning stuff all the time from you, so I appreciate you very much, brother.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast, and thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.